Hey, Laurel, you are on mute,
Oh,
unfortunately. So we did not hear anything that you just said.
no one heard anything I just said. All right, we'll do it again. Let's go back. Run it back.
Yeah, just run it a second time. Let's do this.
Yeah. All right, cool. So, good morning again, everyone. My name is Laurel Scott. I, again, am the co-founder of StartupStarter and the head of platform and partnerships. Welcome back to No Code Week, day 2. Today, we have the wonderful Christian Peverelli and Eddie Whitaker. They will be teaching you how they are helping non-technical founders with no code and educating them to make their best idea come to life. So without further ado, welcome again, off silence, Christian Peverelli and Eddie Whitaker, as they talk to us about what they're working on and kind of show you guys some things in their world.
Hey, Laurel. Awesome having you.
Welcome.
Yeah, absolutely. We're excited for today, and we really appreciate all the work that you and Jose and the rest of the S2 team have put together here. So congrats on that, first of all.
Agree. Yes, thank you, man. Thank you. If you listen, we threw it together really good. We wanted to make something very impactful for people, and we're here. We made it.
Yes.
No, it's going to be super fun. And yesterday was really, the first panel was amazing. Today, we're kind of going to take a step back and kind of get into some of the basics. You know, our real mission is to empower the next generation of digital creators and starting with founders. And you know, for us, it's always about kind of bringing it down, explaining people what this movement is all about, what's out there, what's possible. We're going to be showing you some examples of things that we've built, things that people in the community have built. We'll be talking about no code, where it came from, where we believe it's kind of going. We'll talk about entrepreneurship and sort of how people should be thinking about the way that they build their companies from scratch. And that's sort of the short presentation, but we want to make it really interactive. So the idea is that let's just get questions in immediately. We'll be able to answer them. We're going to be answering some frequently asked questions at the end of it. But, you know, at the end of that, Laurel, if you can also pop in questions, we'll just answer them as well. No problem. It's going to be super fun.
Yes, so drop your questions and your comments in the chat. Stay tuned on the event page, more to come. Post in the event page something you're working on, give people something to look at. And yeah, you guys take it away.
Awesome. Let's do it. So Eddie, how's it going?
It's going pretty well. I'm excited about this, and I think, you know, our goal is to keep it very casual. So this presentation will be, you know, the basics about how to think about when building with no code, and then more in particular, how to build startups, right? And I think the reason why we are essentially presenting this is that many individuals that start with no code get too much fixated on tools rather than the actual problem that they want to solve. So we will essentially share a couple of ways how to think about that. And then also, if you have questions about your startup or where to start, feel free to ask any comments in the question or any questions in the comments. We obviously, as Christian mentioned, have also a lot of frequent asked questions that we will tackle later on. But yeah, this is essentially for you guys, and we're really excited to get started.
Let's do it.
Yeah.
So now we're going to bring in the slideshow. There you go. Thank you very much, Laurel. And we'll just get started. So the first slide is very, very deep and a lot of content on this. But we just want to say hi and talk a little bit about, today we'll be talking about building startups without code. And it's a guide for non-technical founders specifically. We'll jump kind of straight into it. And again, we'll answer your questions at the end. But before that, we'll probably get into some introductions. Eddie, what do you think? Are we ready to go?
Let's do this. Yes.
Nice. I have a little coffee. If other people don't, you should. You know, we're going to try to leave as much time at the end of this to be able to answer questions. So we made this presentation relatively short, just so we can get through all the questions at the end of it as well. Let's go. Excellent. So the first thing I wanted to really bring up is that there is no easy way to build startups. And even though no code is really opening up a bunch of exciting new ways, there is just no easy way. And I think there's kind of this narrative that's coming out of the world. We see it on Shark Tank. We see it, you know, on TV. We see it on the headlines, on TechCrunch. It basically, you know, over-glorifies how easy it is to build startups. And even though there are all these new tools and technologies, building a startup is incredibly hard. And that being said, even though there is no easy way, there is a smart way to build startups. And that's what we're going to try to talk about a little bit today. And before that, we're going to just talk about introductions. So I'll just present myself, then I'll present my co-founder, Eddie. We're the founders of WeAreNoCode, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in just a little second. So my name is Christian Peverelli. I was born in Switzerland. I grew up pretty much all over the world, in Brazil, in France, Cyprus, Greece, Spain, all these different countries, and I speak 5 languages. I built startups right out of university, quit my first job to pursue a growing startup at the time. I raised capital for 2 of those companies, had an exit, and more interesting was that I actually became the director of a startup accelerator in LA called Startup Boost for 3 years. And we essentially trained startups and put them in front of investors. We trained over 100 startups. They raised more than $40 million post-program and got into some of the most sort of, notorious accelerators out there that invest as well. So essentially, we were partnered with Google, and we would train 8 startups out of about 200 applications every 6 months, put them on stage at Google in front of investors. And that was just a really amazing sort of experience. But through that, I really realized, and as going through those applications, that there was just really a fundamental problem with the way that most founders were going about building their startups. And that was like becoming a huge problem. But my entire perspective on startups kind of shifted about 6 years ago when I met Eddie, who is now my co-founder. His story is really amazing, and he's German and Russian, speaks 3 languages, was head of product and innovation for one of the largest independent agencies. So essentially leading innovation internally for one of the largest agency and the biggest brands in the world, building prototypes and products for brands. But the most insane thing for me was to realize that he was able to build these products, launch them in the market for between $100 and $1,000, and it completely just blew my mind. So we became friends. I brought him into the accelerator as a mentor, and he just started delivering incredible value to some of these founders. In this photo, actually, most of the founders that we were training were non-technical, all facing a lot of the same problems when it came to kind of building out MVPs or products, apps, whatever you want to call them. I'll use those interchangeably throughout this presentation. But it was really incredible to see sort of what was possible tapping into this little thing called no code. And so we got together, we realized, hey, we could train 8 founders every 6 months, but what would happen if we were able to train a much larger student body throughout the world? And that's when we got together and built WeAreNoCode. Our mission is, we're an institute for non-technical founders and digital creators. And we essentially are on a mission to empowering non-technical founders globally. So, it's been a super exciting ride. We essentially launched at the beginning of 2020, and we have more than 200 startups in over 23 countries. So it's just been exciting to be able to train all these founders. And we've created partnerships with some amazing schools like UCLA, USC, accelerators as well, like Startup Boost, Scale Health, Shara, Falak, and lots of nonprofits as well, because this movement really has the ability to empower people no matter what your background is like. So I just wanted to kind of get into some of the things now that we've seen. So common mistakes that non-technical people do. Basically, there's been an evolution in terms of the maturity of raising capital. And it means that people need to have 6 months of revenue to be able to be considered by investors for an investment, or at least institutional investors. And what that means is that if you are non-technical, you kind of find yourself at this weird crossroad in terms of how are you going to build out that app? How are you going to go to the market and actually get customers if you don't necessarily have technical skills? So here are this is the crossroad. And so essentially here are the options at the moment. So the first one is kind of like looking for a tech co-founder. This usually ends up looking like people going to networking events or networking on LinkedIn to look for a perfect tech co-founder who, and the likelihood, unfortunately, that you're going to meet someone who's perfectly aligned with the mission and vision and is willing to quit their high-paying job, because that's usually what developers have to join your mission, is very unlikely. I kind of compare it to going to a bar to look for your wife or your other your better part. It's possible, but unfortunately, most people should not put all of their eggs in that basket. Then there's learning how to code. Oftentimes that can take 3 to 6 years to become very good at. And so a lot of people, for them, that's not really an option. Hiring developers can become very expensive. I can't tell you how many of those founders I saw spending hundreds of thousands of dollars building out really extensive products that no one ends up kind of using, and that's a massive problem. But essentially, the price point ends up being anywhere from $30,000 to $250,000 to build products. And so that's, for many people, they just don't have that kind of money, which is totally understandable. And then there's also like hiring offshore developers. I also call this just like hiring cheap developers. So it doesn't necessarily have to be offshore. You pretty much get what you pay for, right? And so even though the price is going to be cheaper, unfortunately, what I've seen over and over and over is deliverable. Like the deliverable ends up being spaghetti code, which is overly complicated. It's very buggy. And then if you need to like switch over to another developer or something, it ends up being unusable, which basically means waste of money. So with all that being said, this amazing innovation that is called no code, so this entire set of tools is super exciting, and it's really changing the way that we can approach it, entrepreneurship as non-technical people. So I wanted to introduce you to no code. We're going to go through some of the basics, and then Eddie is going to bring us through some of the case studies, some platforms we've built, some platforms that we've seen people in the industry built as well, and hopefully you'll get a good understanding of that. So let's look at it. No code, this is one of the definitions. No code is the art of creating a unique solution to a problem that could have been written with code, but that an individual chose to make with more visual methods without coding. So essentially, just like it sounds, but I think to understand a little bit better, we need to understand the evolution of programming. So we used to essentially, every computer understands ones and zeros or Morse code. And so back in the day when we had these really old computers that were the size of your apartment building, we had these punch cards, and we would feed ones and zeros through these punch cards. Over time, we were like, that is going to be a little bit annoying. And so we started creating programming languages that many of you will know, many of them, Python, PHP, Perl, Java, et cetera, et cetera. And so that was a way to interpret these ones and zeros without necessarily having to write them all out individually or use punch cards. And so what no code really is just a natural evolution of programming. And it's also called visual programming. But it's essentially these tools that have visual interfaces that allow you to build with building blocks. Other people think of it like designing with a tool such as PowerPoint and then creating the logic like you would do in something like Excel. So that's essentially it. No code is really a movement. It's a movement that started with the launch of these new tools that allow you to build quite complex software solutions, simple solutions as well, without having to learn how to code and without having to understand coding language either, which obviously has a lot of benefits. So if we look at it in terms of the tools, this is kind of how they evolved. There were some older ones like Dreamweaver that we won't mention as part of this, but we see that like people who know WordPress and Drupal, 2010, we started seeing Shopify, Wix, Squarespace, Weebly, where again, these were no-code tools. These were like early no-code tools, and they just were a little bit more a little bit less flexible in terms of what you could build. You could build shops, you could build landing pages, websites. But what we're talking about when we talk about this no-code movement, it's basically this entire new set of tools that allows you to build way more complex software tools, mobile apps, web apps, progressive web apps, platforms, and of course, websites. And so we see about 1,200 so-called no-code tools. I say so-called because people are using no-code very loosely at the moment. But there are so many tools out there that allow you to build with no-code. So here's kind of an overall introduction to some of the different tools that you can use. But I wanted to get into how no-code actually works so that people can really get the basics out of the way. So how does it work? Essentially, from a design perspective, this is what it used to look like when you were building with code. You see, you have to actually write out the individual lines of code to be able to change the design. This is what it looks like within one of the no-code tools that we're presenting here today. So it's really a visual designer, drag and drop functionalities, and it makes it much, much easier, plain English. Then when we talk about the logic, So when we talk about the logic, it's pretty much we're talking about, if I hovered over this button, I want it to turn from gray to green or whatever it is. This is what it used to look like. And now this is what it looks like when we talk about building with no-code tools. It's all in plain English. You're able to actually define what happens next. When someone requests a ride, we want to create a new ride, et cetera, et cetera. So what do some of these tools actually look like? So this is one of the tools. It looks kind of like a designer. Like it looks very much like a kind of a Photoshop style experience. You have others where you have an experience that looks a little bit more like drag and drop with these different components, and you're creating the logic. So you see here grabbing the destination. And then you have other tools. And so this is an example where we're talking about building iOS and Android apps, sort of more specifically. And then also, I wanted to bring up some of the logic. So if you think of the logic and having it written in plain English, you can create these really interesting workflows where it's like someone clicks on a button, then, it's a sign up button, then that user will be signed up. They will then be sent an email, and then you want to direct them to the homepage. So that's kind of the logic and the way that people are building with no code. It's really using plain English to be able to define how the mechanisms work. And so it's a really interesting thing, and it obviously presents just a huge number of benefits for everyone. But here I want to talk a little bit about what it looks like for founders, startup founders. So here is actually something that Forward Partners, they're a VC firm in London, put together, and they talk about no code as the new model. And these are kind of the side-by-side comparisons that they make in terms of the benefits that people can see from no code. So before, essentially, the time to build an app or an MVP, which is a minimum viable product, so it's the first product that you're going to bring to the market, essentially, it took about a year. With no code, once you know how to build with no code, it takes about 6 weeks. Then in terms of cost, they said that the old model was $50,000. And now the new model with no code, it's like less than $1,000. You can build out your solution. In terms of kind of team and size, we're talking about going from multiple people. So having a front-end developer, a back-end developer, someone taking care of the middleware, potentially even a UI and a UX designer, and you could even have a project manager. And now we're talking about one individual being able to take a couple of those roles and to be able to build out these solutions. And when we talk about the capabilities, we're going from people who are simply, you just have to be technical, you have to know how to write code, to you can be non-technical. So it's no surprise that people like Jason Calacanis are pretty bullish about no code. He said in a quote in one of his interviews that startups being able to get to year 2 with $250,000 in revenue without ever having a developer is the greatest unlock I can think of right now for our economy and for entrepreneurship. And frankly, I couldn't agree more. I think that there are just so many different use cases here, and I'm super excited to see where this movement is going. But to get a little bit more into detail, let's bring up Eddie, who's going to be talking about the real world examples.
Awesome. Thank you, Christian. And also, thank you so much for all of you for all of the questions. Feel free to continue with the questions. We'll answer all of them. We'll make sure all of them will be covered. Right. So really, the next couple of slides are meant to really inspire you to see what's possible. And then more importantly, I want you to take a look at the timing and the cost that it usually takes to start and develop with no code. So as the first example, I would like to introduce ClearSegment. So ClearSegment is a SaaS platform that allows marketing agencies and brands to identify what targeting segments they need to target and essentially buy. So it's a very niche product. It is a software as a service business. So basically, people pay X amount per month to use the platform to have access to it. The entire building cost just for this was 10 days. And to be honest, maybe 6 days were just thinking, 4 days were more doing actually the implementation, the design, and the flow. And then also when you think about the cost, the entire cost for the entire stack for the first month is $40. And also, if you think about the cost for the next 6 months just with this stack, and we'll show you what tools we used, is around $250, right? So you basically, with $250, are totally covered for the next 6 months with your own SaaS platform. So the tools that we used here is Webflow, Airtable, MemberStack, and Zapier. So for those of you who are new to this, so Webflow allows you to fully visually build out the design, all of the pages. MemberStack allows you to create user management and essentially allow users to log in and view the content that is after they pay. And then Airtable was used for the database function, and Zapier was used as a kind of like glue in between multiple technologies. So in this case, every time someone signs up, we use Zapier to send them an email, a welcome email, and so on. And we basically use Zapier to send email from MemberStack to an email platform. So just like a rough idea. A couple other examples here that I've built in the past is Proofreader.ai. So this platform allows you to upload any visual content, be it a sketch file, be it a PDF, be it a screenshot that you just took of any text document, and it allows you to proofread the entire document for you. So if you think about the building cost, here we're talking about, this was in particular built for $500 in 21 days. And the tools that were used here were Webflow for essentially all of the visuals. We also used Google Cloud, the Google Cloud API to extract letters and writings from visual data and gave it back to the Language Tool API, which is an open source library that does that allows you to proofread things and then essentially displayed it back to the user. Another example here, we're talking about Sizely. So Sizely was built for under $1,000 in 90 days. It's currently at 38,000 users, and the monthly revenue is 25,000 right now. So this also was built in no code. We used also low code components, and there's also a question in the audience I would love to address in regards to that. In short, Sizely is a platform allowing sellers around the world to visualize their sizing measurements when they sell items and clothing online. Next up, if we take a step back, actually we have Clamly here. This is actually a really interesting project, and this is a little bit older, but no code to that point. This in particular was 4 to 5 years old. That actually was built during the last crypto boom. So Clamly was a website that allows anyone to shorten a URL. The second you share that URL with someone else and people browse that page, a cryptocurrency miner in the background is essentially mining cryptocurrencies, and you're essentially getting paid by the minute if individuals browse a particular content or a user's content in that case. So the entire cost to build Clamly was around $600. This was again built in 14 days. The monthly users for this particular in its heyday were 200,000 users, and the total revenue from something like this was $38,000. Right, so built for $600 in 14 days, and essentially the total revenue was $38,000. This page or this particular tool was only alive for I think 6-7 months. And then it was pretty much shut down because Chrome and Firefox and other browsers disallowed the mining of cryptocurrencies. So this made this business obsolete. So it was totally shut down. However, it essentially shows you how quickly you can take an idea, implement it, get it out of the market, and essentially test it. So now I'd like to share a couple additional examples, or actually go into how you build simple and complex apps, just like on a very high level view on how to think about that. So when it comes to starting off with no code, you can essentially build an app or a web app, iOS, Android app, or a web app where you essentially have all of the components already. You have a login, you have a sign up, you have a payment function, be it that in this case, be it for that you use Stripe or any other payment provider. You have also a database where you save either user files or in this case, the users itself. You have a user management, the complex logic flow, various notifications, and for many, that's already an app. That's already a business. That's already a product, in other words. For those of you who essentially want to have a more complex app, there are the opportunities to essentially, one, connected to additional to an AI model, for instance, be it in this case a custom model that you developed or a model that you use from Google, Microsoft, and other various cognitive services. If you also want to include or pull in data sources, be it either on a weekly or monthly, weekly, daily, or second-by-second basis, you can do that too. And here's some of the examples when it comes to data sources. It could be, in this case, weather data, traffic data, stock market data, any type of data from an outside service that you would like to pull into your app to improve the user experience. And then lastly, can also integrate with Amazon, Google, and Microsoft, either for their storage services, for their cognitive services, or any other services that they have. And best of all, you essentially integrate it all via an API, and this is also done with no code. So you essentially, for many, the word API is very complex. However, in no code, you have the ability to visually connect the API to other services and essentially get data that you would like to use from other services into your app. Next up, I would like to share a couple of examples from the community, something that we've seen and really impressive. So for instance, Nadeem, he's one of the non-technical co-founders of New Year's Day. They also used a no-code stack, and they were able to scale New Year's Day, which is the luxury version of Airbnb, to $5 million in annual revenue. And something that is really neglected all the time is they were able to do that without investors or without funding, because the building cost and the cost to maintain with no code or a low code stack is so minimal that you essentially can self-fund it and essentially bootstrap it yourself. Another example is Danny. So she had a really interesting path in a way. So she quit her job without a plan B and developed Scribbly.io, which is a content marketing service, after she discovered no code 8 weeks after. And she was able, within the first 12 months of developing Scribbly, to scale it up to $20,000 in monthly recurring revenue. And I think this is really, impressive of like someone discovered no code. Okay, how do I essentially develop a product? There's a market need based on my previous experience, get it up, and essentially able to monetize that. So really, really impressive. In addition, so here I would like to essentially inspire everyone so you can get a better understanding of what is actually possible. And the examples here, so you can essentially build products like Lyft, Uber, Tinder, WhatsApp, and Instagram. And we have seen a Lyft copy, an Uber copy, a Tinder copy, a WhatsApp copy being built in no-code land from other makers, right? And here I want to just like essentially showcase like what actually is out there and what has been done already, right? And when we talk about features, when it comes to apps, including features such as geolocation, messaging, real-time tracking that usually, that you usually need when it comes to an Uber or an Instacart. So all of them are also be able to build them in no code. Next up, we have some. So if you're building a marketplace such as Airbnb, where you have multiple parties, Upwork, Amazon, Indiegogo, eBay, Fiverr, and so on, we've seen those being built in no code. And just to be clear, I'm not saying Airbnb was built in no code, but we've seen Airbnb-like services, marketplaces where individuals, built an Airbnb, such as New Year's Day, fully in no code, right? And allowing you for features such as profiles of a host or of a user, house listings, as well as the splitting up of payments, so that essentially whenever there's a transaction happening on your marketplace, that you get essentially 1, 2, 3, or 5% cut off each transaction. And also the splitting and all of the logic can be built and has been built in no code. In addition, if you are into social networks, we've also seen copies of YouTube, of LinkedIn, Twitter, even Facebook, Instagram, and Pinterest. So we've seen a lot of copies that in that case were copied and then essentially deployed in each individual niche. And then allowing you to build out features such as messaging, notifications, and then also specific features that are very, known in social media, such as image sharing, video sharing, and voice sharing. So all of them can be built with no code overall. And lastly, if you're into some really interesting products, such as Netflix, or you're building out like a Salesforce CRM copy, or sales tools such as Pipedrive or Slack, Eventbrite, or even Zoom. There was one individual that essentially copied Zoom, copied the all functionalities of Zoom in no code. In this case, it was no code, low code, but nonetheless, it shows you essentially like the power of it, allowing you to have features such as video calling, streaming, automation, and so on, which is really like showcasing that you can essentially also build something really, really powerful. So if this is not enough, we have additional examples, and these are actual real world examples from makers around the world, from no coders around the world that were able to build their businesses either no code or low code, something in between. You can go to our website and essentially go to the showcase section where you can explore various examples if you're just curious to explore some additional ones. So net, the question is, can you build your app with no code? As long as it's somewhat, similar to the examples that I shared before, the clear answer is yes, you can. However, and there's a gigantic however, and I think this is something that gets neglected all the time. And that, however, will actually be delivered by Christian, because that is something that is, in many instances, not seen. People just get into no code, they start building, but they miss out on this in particular. Christian, enlighten us.
Yeah, I get to give you the bad news in the whole situation.
Exactly.
So you can see how we've structured the good cop, bad cop relationship here in our partnership. Yep. So yeah, I mean, the biggest, however, is really that building is not enough. And I talked a little bit about this at the beginning of the presentation. But there was basically a study that was done by Statista that showed back in 2016 that 90% of the apps in the App Store were zombie apps that were never actually being used. And also, there was another report that came out showing that no market need was the number one mistake that was leading startups to startup failure. And so there's this idea of like, hey, I will build it and they will come, like I'll just build out this amazing app. And of course, everyone's going to want to use it. That could not be further from the truth. In fact, Steve Blank, who is one of the godfathers of lean methodology or startup methodology, he says, build it and they will come is not a strategy, it's a prayer. And I absolutely love this quote because he's completely spot on. And that's really the biggest problem that I currently see in the market, is that a product is not a startup. There are all these other aspects of building a startup that people have to understand, have to learn and upskill to be able to increase their chances and likelihood of succeeding with their startup. So things like, what is it that customers actually want and are willing to pay for? What business model are you going to employ? There are 14 proven digital business models currently out there. What pricing are people willing to pay for? What is the price sensitivity to the customer? So, if you change the price, how many proportionally clients are you going to lose? You need to know how to do sales. You need to know how to do marketing. You need to know how to do partnerships. You need to know how to, there are just a huge number of things. And if you want to raise capital, you need to understand, the 101 of raising capital. You need to understand how to create pitch decks, financial forecasts. There are a lot of different things. And as a founder, you're really well set up for success once you're well-rounded with these different things. So essentially, now I want to bring you a little bit into sort of startup land and talk about startup methodology meets no code. So really just kind of like talking a little bit about, how you can leverage lean methodology. It's a pretty straightforward process, and I'm really going to oversimplify it in this sort of example here, just to show how you can actually go about building a product. Because the main mistake I see people making is, I have an idea, I'm going to go build it. I'm not a coder. I need to find a coder, or I need to pay for a coder, et cetera, et cetera. And that's, one of the classic quotes from the head of YC is that, building startups is incredibly counterintuitive. So let me talk to you a little bit more about this lean methodology and how it pairs nicely with no code to be able to launch products and turn them into businesses. So we'll talk about the process now from start to finish. At first, basically, you need to really just set your hypotheses, right? You have all these things going around in your head. You need to identify the hypotheses, the key hypotheses behind what you are trying to build. And you need to put those to the test to reduce the risk of your startup. Because right now it's just you believing that you have the best idea that's going to change the world. But unless you're just going to be the only customer for this product, you need to make sure that there's also, like a demand for it. So when you set your hypotheses, for example, Airbnb, one of their big hypotheses was that, people who had a second home or who had a home and left on vacation would be willing to rent it out to strangers at first. And that was a hypothesis that was core to their business. They were able to prove that that was in fact correct. But again, understanding the hypotheses that are going to make or break your startup is super important. So get very clear about what it is that you are building, very clear about your entire business model. You can use, essentially, there's the business model canvas is an interesting exercise to do. It's relatively theoretic, but it really allows you to kind of map things out and really become very, very clear about what it is you're doing. After that, you have your idea. That's great. Let's figure out what people say they actually want. So we're going to go and do customer discovery, which is essentially a set of interviews where you are talking about your product and startup exactly 0 times. I really want to emphasize that. That's the number one mistake people make when they do interviews. Essentially understanding what it is that people want based on what it is that they're having trouble with. So you want to make sure that you're targeting problems that not only people are having, but that there's kind of like a subsegment of people who are having this and they're all in agreement that this is a problem. They're potentially even already paying to try to solve this problem and are not seeing success. Hopefully, they're also seeing this problem recur several times. So, a problem that's happening several times might be a problem that people are more willing to pay for a solution to. And that really is going to just kind of like mend the gap between what you believe people want and what people are saying that they want. But then after that, what we need to do, there's another big gap, which is the difference between what people say and what people do, right? It's like if I say that I'm going to start skateboarding and I never pick up a skateboard and actually do it, well, yeah, that's just basically a pipe dream. So in this case, what we want to do is create a market test. And so, there are a lot of different validators. The ultimate validator is always going to be revenue, just money in the bank. If someone pays for something, that validates that there is demand for the product. But there's actually a lot of different things you can do in the meantime to be able to see if people are actually taking an action that shows that they're willing to buy. That could be, a letter of intent for some people. That could be a fake buy button that is showing that product might be out of stock at the moment, at the checkout potentially. It could be in doing pre-sales where you would be able to sell the product before even building it. So that you can think of things like Kickstarter. But essentially really identifying which market test is going to be the best validator for your startup, and then building that out with no-code tools, essentially. You can build them out. Then what you're going to want to do is to actually promote and measure. So that's when you want to really get into like tracking and analytics, because you're going to use that and act like you have everything figured out and essentially go out there and sell, right? You're going to go and promote. You're going to get people towards your value proposition, which is something that we talk about a lot within our program. But essentially, we're going to promote it, but we have to measure how people are using it so that we can take that insight and then translate it into adaptations of the value proposition or potentially of the customer segment that you're targeting with that. So these are all really like pretty basic. I'm really breaking them down in a very simplistic way. But after that, once you know what people actually want and you validated your idea that people are excited to line, you're building this pipeline of customers, and now you've justified going out and building that deeper product or the MVP. So again, that's when we're going to jump back into no-code and start building out MVPs, all leveraging no-code. Again, MVPs are minimum viable product. So it's the first product. The way I define it is the first product that you can use to actually monetize or get traction. So essentially getting traction or revenue. And that feature list is really going to be 100% determined by the people that you have already kind of either sold to or are in connection with. You've built this pipeline of people, and now it's going to make sense to build out that MVP because people are actually going to want to buy it. And the last step is very simple. You just fulfill it. And people think that's the end of the road, but no, that's the beginning of a feedback loop where you're going to be able to iterate and make that, solve the person's problem even better, and essentially also figure out what the next features list is. And oftentimes we say just don't build too many features. In startup land, we really talk about what is your killer feature. And I think that that's also a very important thing to talk about. When we talk about building out MVPs and no code in general, I'd just like to talk about kind of, solving the transportation problem. So let's say we're solving the transportation problem. The wrong way of building out a product is basically like this, where every iteration of the product does not solve the problem until the very last one. So you could be spending 3 years building a car just to realize that people don't want your car. The better way to do it is, in fact, to build products that at each iteration of the product, they are solving an actual problem and people are willing to pay for it. And over time, you're essentially building deeper and deeper products to solve that problem even better. And the people would be willing to pay even more for potentially. So in this example, every MVP you can pretty much build from the skateboard, like all the way through in no code. We'll be answering some questions around some of the limitations of things, but this is absolutely the right approach so that you're not building something over several years that people end up not wanting to pay for. They're happy to use it, but there's no monetization method. That's a huge problem. And so that's really the reason why Eddie and myself put together a program that's called the No Code Startup. And what it is an action-based program for early stage, non-technical founders to build, launch, and monetize their startup without having to write a single line of code. So what it is essentially the 15 years of experience that I have and the 15 years of experience that Eddie has in launching products and helping founders and building startups. So it's the cross-section between a startup accelerator, where you're going to learn how to actually build a business. And within that, we teach a curated list of no-code tools that will allow you to build your specific product, launch it in the market, etc. And our main sort of mission is to empower non-technical founders. And what people get from our program is to actually go ahead and build their app or whatever it is, a SaaS platform, a website maybe even, without being a techie at all. Go ahead and figure out the startup fundamentals, acquire users, and then also how to turn them into customers without necessarily having to be a hard seller. And then also just to save people a huge amount of time and money along the startup journey. There are all these other things, premature expenses in marketing, in lawyers, there are so many mistakes you can make along the way. And so we really share our insight and have created this step-by-step program that allows you to really break down the entire thing. So it essentially comes down to putting together all the elements that allow founders to succeed. So there's the know-how, step-by-step process, essentially really broken down in a video curriculum that really goes click by click, step by step, templates, blueprints, et cetera, to really shortcut the journey and really upskill people as quickly as possible. Then the coaching and support that people need as they're going through that process to really make sure that they're focused and on point and going in the right direction as well, and not making too many of the expensive mistakes that most founders make over and over. We also have this awesome community. So networking is really big for us. We just started also doing one-on-one kind of chat roulette style interactions because we have a thriving community that is just so excited and vibrant, and they're like meeting each other. They want to find accountability buddies. They want to find co-founders, et cetera. We also provide a huge package of discounts, over $300,000 worth of discounts for no-code tools, but also for all the other tools that you're going to need, analytics tools, internal management tools, etc. We don't want you to spend a lot of money as you're going through that process. And of course, support. So we provide video support so that we can show you exactly how to change things as you're going through your build. Your idea, your startup is completely unique. And so you need to get feedback on your work. You need to get advice. You need to get sort of unstuck from your roadblocks. And we do all of that through video support. So there you go. Our mission is really empowering founders of the future. And so we really define these as people who are able to identify and fine-tune opportunities incredibly quickly and honestly take advantage of these opportunities within the window of opportunity that opens and closes, because that's the nature of innovation. people were able to actually build out their MVPs cost effectively and without developers, and be able to iterate and turn their users into paying customers without necessarily having to be that awkward hard seller. So we really want to put all the tools in the hands of founders who will then be able to leverage those tools and be able to use a repeatable process that they can use to be able to launch their startup ideas quickly. And that's what it really comes down to. Maybe the first startup that you build does not succeed. That's totally okay. But over time, if you really learn how to bring your ideas to market quickly, you will eventually hit something that works. And when you do, I can tell you, your life pretty much changes. So it's super exciting for us. But now we'll jump into the FAQs. We want to answer your questions. Eddie, we'll probably start answering questions already that are in the chat first, and then we'll go into FAQs just because, if we have a bit of extra time.
That sounds perfect. Yeah. So a couple of questions. Question number one was, what are your thoughts on low code versus no code? Is there a difference? Yeah. So essentially, just to kind of like break down the terminology, no code is kind of some sort of a newer term. It's been around for 2-3 years. Before, it's called visual programming or component-based programming. So that essentially means that you can create a solution without writing a single line of code, right? You're not touching the code. You're not touching, HTML or JavaScript. You're essentially not writing a single line of code, right? You're essentially using components. You write out logic in plain English. So you're essentially removed from code, right? You have essentially one step removal from that. Low code, on the other hand, essentially means that there's some code implementation. So basically, in this case, you might have like one particular feature that either requires a little bit of a snippet of code, or a feature that essentially was fully developed by a developer that you include into your no-code stack, right? And something that also many people don't realize is like you can essentially, build out your solution no-code and integrate custom code into that, and that's totally fine, right? And I think something that is, while we are in a no-code week, it's like, no code is a really good starter, really good way to essentially start, get your idea out, essentially validate it, build it up, and then if you run into roadblocks, use a little bit of low code or custom snippets, right? I think for many individuals, that have no idea about coding, just like starting with low code might be a little bit intimidating. So no code might be a really good way. And something that we also see, a lot of people that start with no code, they get actually more and more technical. They're like, hey, I kind of like it. I want to learn more about this. I want to essentially do some really more complex features. So they essentially get into low code and then essentially start learning code, right? So it's totally a possible way.
Yeah. Also, we see that a lot of people are just, that's why it's really not, when we say no code, you have to understand just there's a spectrum, right? And it's totally fine if at a certain point you need to add a little bit of code to your solution. The idea here is that no code is kind of that gateway between developers and people who can build without being developers and meet in the middle. Some of the best no coders are developers too. Others are complete novices who just jumped in and just started learning and have just become good with these tools. So.
All right. I think the second question that we have, I want to build something to manage my user files using some type of database system. Any suggestions? So it seems like that you already have something up and running. Would love to understand a little bit more. So can't really give you a fully precise answer. However, I would like to check out in this case Bubble. They have broken it down how to go about databases a little bit more in a simpler terms that also allows you to onboard files from your existing app, not only for user management but also for file management of your users. And then you also have the option to essentially have that offloaded into AWS. So in other words, you can either host all of your data within the platform, in this case user data, or you can decide for the user for the files. Let's say all of your users have terabyte files that they upload, right? You might want to offload that and have it hosted and on AWS. On the user end, they will not know, but essentially on the back end, you essentially have it in AWS.
Yeah,
hope that answers.
Love that. Then there's another question that's by DJ Switz. It's let's say you have cash or access to it. Would you recommend saving yourself time spent tinkering with no code and working on some of the other steps than working on low code or something else. I would say that as a founder, every single opportunity, regardless of whether you're selling software as a service or wood, like everything requires something technical. No code is a very powerful way to actually build out these things. And no code is also going to be very useful in your customer acquisition, in your marketing, in SEO strategy, and all these other things that revolve around it. So I would say 100%. Like, you should learn no code because there are going to be so many use cases today and tomorrow that you'll be able to take advantage of.
Yeah, and I think also if you made entrepreneurship your career, right? And I think, there are some staple no-code solutions that I think are just like part of a tool set for founders of the future, essentially, right? It's like Webflow, Bubble, be it in this case for application development or for marketing pages and so on, right? So essentially it's just a tool set. And I think just starting with it, getting to know it will just help you succeed better. One thing that, want to really hammer down, and I think Christian did that, right? It's like the validation. We see so many individuals, oh, I have this idea. To how many people did you talk to? Well, I talked to my mom, to my sister, and my friends, and I pitched to them, and they gave me the mommy treatment of like, oh, okay, that's a good idea, right? And it's horrible. It's like, you don't want to do that, right? So you want to essentially, as Christian mentioned, talk about the problem, not about your solution, and also ask specific questions to learn more about the problem and the problem that the individuals experience, not pitch, right? And here, while no code, low code, the entire space is so exciting, if your intent is to build a business around that, focus firstly on the problem, validate that, and then get into no code, right? And I think I see so many people who start essentially, worshipping specific tools, and it's like, oh my God, and this tool is the best, and so on, and then they get fixated based on the capabilities of a particular tool and see their problem through the lens through that tool and through that capabilities, right? So this ultimately limits the way how you go about solving a problem, because you always see it through a particular tool, or because this new feature came out. Now it's like, oh, this feature is now out. How can I figure out a problem that I can solve with that, right? So in other words, net, start with the problem, and then it goes about the technology. Yeah. Don't find the technology and then search for a problem for that.
Yeah, and just to come back to the first part of the question, if you do have money, I can tell you, startups are going to take a little bit of cash to build, full stop. But essentially, you just also want to make sure that you're investing that money in the right places, because the people who I see who end up wasting the most money are the people who have the most money and who have access to capital. And even I've seen people literally sink $800,000 in products that were going to completely have to be rebuilt because they were either not targeting the right audience, or they weren't able to fulfill on the business model, so they had to be unbuilt and rebuilt.
Christian, how many applications have you seen of founders, that essentially spend 2 years on something without actually talking to a single customer? And if they talk to individuals, usually they pitched, right?
Yeah, honestly, I've probably seen a couple thousand applications as I was running the accelerator program. And then I always get just pitch decks from just people who are, the common mistakes always come back to like, people are not doing the work of building a startup. They're doing the work of presenting their startup. Oh, let's fundraise with investors. Oh, let's, all these things which are not moving the needle. The industry has matured, and we have to talk about this because it's a problem. So I think that, essentially the number of people who make the mistake of thinking, hey, I'll just build a product and people will love it. That's absolutely true, but you have to make sure that you are not just building it into that you're not just building into a product, that you're building an actual like business. And that's kind of one thing that we want to emphasize. It's like people oftentimes get really like caught up in all the details of the tech and the specific features and this and that. And it's like, we got to take a step back, and we have to start talking about like, okay, is there a real need for this product? Like, no one really knows that. Even if someone, is a hater against your idea, like they don't know whether or not the idea that you want to bring to market is a possibility. And to all those people who see competition out there, like, oh, but someone else has done it. There's always opportunities in between other opportunities. There's always, like most people will have never heard of this so-called competitor that you can get to and create a really healthy business with. And I think that's another thing we want to really talk about. It's like, hey, not everyone has to take this VC-funded highway. There's this whole thing where you get to be your own boss. You get to have the full freedom you want. And you can build $5 to $10 million businesses that in many cases, VCs are just not interested in because the kind of returns, and it's not because they're mean. They're lovely. I have lots of friends who are VCs and they have investors too. They're taking money in from LPs who want to invest in high risk opportunities for high risk reward. And so it really just is a segment. And what we're saying is like with no code, there's the opportunity to get into high growth startups. But you can also, at first, it all starts with building a business that people are paying for or that is monetizable. And that's what's really exciting. So,
Yeah, and I think, especially with, our philosophy is that with no code and low code, it will essentially allow to solve for smaller problems around the world, right? Because there's, I think we have like 7 billion people, right? And only like 0.3% of them are developers. But now essentially individuals that have a problem or see a problem are able to essentially, take it upon themselves to essentially deliver towards that because they can, as a non-technical founder, as a non-technical entrepreneur, develop their first MVP to solve that, right? And I think this also means that there's this huge opportunity of developing a healthy bootstrap business where you essentially service a niche market, you essentially, obsess about the problem and can develop a business that makes maybe, 10, 20, 30, $40,000 a month. And for many, and actually that's very, very realistic, right? $1 billion exit is possible, but only for little, for like a tiny percentage of founders, right? But something that is a bigger opportunity are these, $500,000 or $1 million annual companies built in no code or just like low code in general. I think we're at time, huh? I think we went.
Yeah.
Like, what are you guys doing?
Coming back on the screen means, I guess, huh?
Yeah, no, also we have a lot of questions and we'll be answering them in the networking session. So, so we'll cover all of them. So, but yeah, thank you. Feel free to send more.
Yeah, sorry if we did not get to your question again. Look in the chat, go back to the event page. We will get your questions live here. Me and Eddie will hop on to the networking session. You guys, this was great. Great information. You guys are very knowledgeable. People can find you guys at www.wearenocode.com. Check them out. They are a very great educational resource for you guys when it comes to the no-code space and just the different tools to use and how to take your business from start, point A to point B. So check that out. Still to come today, we have Adalo. We have Building Adalo with Doc Williams with Brand Factory, as well as we have a founder story with Tapcart as well. So be on the lookout for that. Check your emails for your newsletter, as well as going back to the event page. Again, we'd like to thank all of our sponsors for sponsoring this event, Tapcart.xyz, Beam Conferencing, and our media partner, Parlay Me, for being a part of this great event and all of these good webinars, workshops during the week. So everyone hop over to the live networking session on Beam Conferencing. We'll see you there and have a great rest of the day. And we'll see you throughout the rest of the day. Talk soon, guys.
Take care. Thanks everyone.
Bye.
Thanks for watching.
This is Jane. Jane's got an online store and she's doing pretty good.
Crushing it.
But like every store owner, Jane wants an app.
I want an app.
You need an app.
I can't build an app.
But she could. With Tapcart, she was able to design and launch the perfect app for her brand without having to deal with her developer. Now Jane can spend more time on the things she loves, being creative, connecting with her customers, and collecting sweaters for her dog, Sadie. Hey, Sadie.
Watch this.
Tapcart enables Jane to send these interactive push notifications directly to her customers, getting them back in the app and making purchases. back on top. So what's next?
Flash sale.
Updating her app is a breeze. Add new blocks, feature a sale, share new content from anywhere. Plus, TapCart keeps her app up to date with the latest technology. So no more dealing with this guy. This is the future, Jane.
Yep, I'm the future.
Your brand, your products, your app. TapCart.